Hey everyone, welcome back to the Path to Purpose podcast. My name is Kieran Williams, and today I'm actually going to be explaining about the reality of things going wrong, talking about how it's a way to make it an opportunity to go your way. And actually in this episode I'm going to be talking about a recent time for me when I initially felt like things were going wrong, but it wasn't until a bit later on that I realised that actually it was for the best, the way that things were happening. So when I was travelling in Asia, there was a point where I was eventually running out of money and I wasn't sure how I was going to be able to basically keep going, so I had no choice but to come home. And of course, as hard as I was trying to make it work, to find work and to be successful in my own eyes, I felt like I hadn't achieved what I'd set out to achieve. So there was a point where I went through a lot of self-doubt on whether I could have worked harder at a lot of things. And of course, one of the lessons you can learn from that is that there is always so many ways of doing things, and there is never really a wrong decision. Anyway, after I came back home, it wasn't until a little while after that I realised that this was an opportunity to make things go my way. The way that I did that, I did speak about a lot in my last episode, so if you haven't listened to that already, go and check it out. I talk about how I focused on the things that are going to improve my health, my mindset. Ultimately, doing that has progressed me a lot further, and I wouldn't have the mindset and the outlook on life that I have today if I didn't do that. So there was a reason for me coming back home and having that experience. It was like one of those moments where you feel like it was meant to happen. So again, it's all about perspective, and I know myself very well that a couple of years ago, if this had happened, I probably would have looked at things in a completely different way. I wouldn't have seen it as an opportunity to grow. I would have seen it as a failure, and I would have probably just sat in my room and probably wouldn't have been looking for another way to get back out and travel. So one of the first things that really made me think about my situation was when I actually started to take time to really listen to my wants and needs that would actually make me happy, and also to stop procrastinating. And I know there's a lot of you out there that probably struggle with procrastination as well, and it's a very real thing and it's not fun, but when you can push past it and just get things done, you start training yourself the power of what it's like to actually take action. And it did take me a while to get out of that procrastination phase. Even recently, it's been very difficult for me to get out of that. But I feel like now more than ever, I've been so much clearer than I've ever been before. And one thing that's really helped a lot is raising my energy and keeping fit, going for walks. Again, everything that I mentioned in my previous episode. I've even taken on intermittent fasting, which I didn't really cover in my previous episode, but that's one thing that I've been doing that is also benefiting me a lot. And of course, this isn't something that I advise for everyone, as I know that intermittent fasting is a very selective thing, especially if you have certain dietary requirements, things like that. But for me, it works out really well. So that's one thing for me that's really worked. But also bringing yourself out of that state where you dwell on the past and where you worry about the future. So basically keeping yourself present in the moment. And don't get me wrong, it's great to think about the future, but only if you're focusing on your goals that you want to achieve. But obviously it becomes unhealthy when we think about all the things that might go wrong. And actually you start to adopt that mindset and you start to believe that things really will go wrong. So it's just about training yourself to think the other way, about the things that will go right, and training yourself to believe that everything will go right. And if they don't go your way, you just have to trust that, oh, okay, so it didn't go how I wanted it to, but you've got to trust that there is something better in store for you. And the more that you keep that mindset up, you can never truly fail, because you're always determined to make it work. As soon as you, of course, start to see things as going wrong, then your mindset instantly goes to, oh, this is never going to work for me. You start almost giving an affirmation that things are not going to go right for you. That's when I started to change my way of speech, even if I didn't at first believe myself. Sometimes I didn't even believe myself when I used to say it. I used to say to myself, no, things are going to go right, things will go right. And it didn't necessarily mean at the time that I was believing it, but eventually the more I told myself and the more I actually thought about what I was saying, I started to believe the words and I started to trust that things will start to go right. So this also proves how quickly things can change when you really focus on changing your mindset. And another thing as well is something that my friend Rob made me aware of, and Rob will be on one of my podcast episodes in the future. You can find him on Instagram at Ameri Travels. That's AMERI and then Travels. And he's a good friend of mine, and he's also in the same niche as me with photography, travel, YouTubing. He's a great guy, and he made me very aware over the last few months as well that it's about consistency. So when things go wrong, You just have to be consistent. Like, that's the most important thing you can be. And it's good when you feel motivated to do things, but it's during the times where you don't feel motivated that you really have to push past that and become consistent. Because even on the days where you don't want to do things, if you're consistent and you tell yourself and give yourself a good talk about how it's going to benefit you, then you can get yourself out of that little rut, let's call it. Because we've all been there, where we wake up that some days we're not motivated like we were the day before. We don't feel like we're in the same mindset. Maybe we have like doubts, or we just wake up from a bad sleep, or whatever it is. It's very easy to just come out of that mindset and say, oh, I don't feel like doing this today. But don't get me wrong, there is nothing wrong with having rest days if that's what your body and mind needs, if that's what what it's telling you. But if it comes down to laziness, or if it comes down to just procrastinating because you'd rather be doing something else, you've just got to tell yourself that the things that you're putting off being consistent in make your journey to your goals even longer. And I hope that makes sense, what I've said. Because if you're consistent, then you'll always be working towards the life that you really want. But if you only work when you're motivated, then it will only be for a short time and it will eventually wear off. I think it really is just about being aware of when you're drifting away from following your goals, and literally just talk to yourself in the same way that you would talk to someone else that you would want to see succeed. Maybe you're talking to one of your friends and giving them some motivation and a talk about doing things like you would for anyone you care. You've got to do that same thing for yourself, because when you say it to someone else, that's your inner truth coming out. You know what is right for that person, and the same thing that is right for that person can also reflect on the things that would be right for you. And there's also a few other podcasts and books that I've listened to that do talk about this, and that's kind of what really resonated with me. So the main point from them is that you need to really realise when you're starting to give up or lose interest because you lose that initial burst of energy and dedication. Another thing that really helps me as well is writing things down. So I've actually got a journal where I write down questions for myself, and they're like long-term questions. So it would be things like, where do I want to see myself this time next year? Is what I'm doing right now going to help me to progress? It's things like that that give you that keep you in that mindset of, I have to be consistent with what I'm doing because this is the life I want to live. And if I don't, I'm just going to be unhappier later. So it's not meant to be easy, because if you want your life to work out, you have to put in that extra bit of effort. You have to be consistent. So basically just give yourself a pep talk, write things down, be kind to yourself, and just trust yourself. That is very, very important. And it's really helped me anyway to stay focused on my goals. It's helped me to develop new skills as well. It's helped me to build up the courage to actually create this podcast. And I'm really enjoying making this for you guys. So if you are enjoying these episodes, I really appreciate it. And I'm happy to have you guys on the journey with me and hopefully help you along the way as well. So this could definitely be something for you to try. And even if you just write them down somewhere just to remind yourself of why you started your journey. Yeah, basically that's just the reality of how I initially thought to myself that things were going to go wrong. But at the end of the day, it's all about your perspective on the situation and training yourself to think about positive outcomes. If I didn't return home and attempt to try again, I would never have learned all that I know today. I would have never have read 11 books over the last few months to help improve myself. I would never have been as healthy as I am today. And lastly, I probably wouldn't have considered making this podcast. So with that being said, this does bring me to the end of the episode now, as that was the point I was passionate about making for you all. I hope there's at least one thing you could take from this episode to help you on your journey, or should I say your path to purpose. But thanks for listening, and yeah, I'll catch you all in the next episode.